Hello, everyone. Senator Tammy Duckworth here with Dr. Amanda Adeleye, a reproductive endocrinologist and infertility specialist in Chicago. Somebody who had a much higher GPA than I ever did, by the way. I was so proud to host her as my State of the Union guest last year. This Pride Month, we are as committed as ever to fighting for the right of every American to build their family if, when, and how they choose to, no matter who is in the White House. I know there's a lot of misinformation surrounding LGBTQ plus fertility and reproductive health. So today we'll be breaking down a few myths that continue to stigmatize fertility and reproductive health care for LGBTQ plus families. To start off, I know one myth is that fertility conversations are only important for straight cisgendered couples. Dr. Adeleye, you and I both know right off the bat how this first myth couldn't be further from the truth. What are your thoughts as a fertility professional when you hear this type of thinking?
Absolutely. And first, thank you for taking the time to talk with me about such an important issue. I'm really passionate about it, and for all that you do for Illinois and for our country. Yes, so on the notion that really family building is just for straight cis folks, it couldn't be further from the truth. And in a field like reproductive endocrinology and infertility, we have so many tools at our fingertips to help build families. And really our goal is to help people build the family of their dreams. And what I like to tell people is we just need sperm, an egg, and a uterus. It's not about, who you love or, what you do, but if we can get those three things, we can help you build a family.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Can you just mention another myth perhaps that's out there for same-sex relationships or other intending parents?
Yeah, one thing I've heard that's really, it's out there. There's a myth that really you have to be genetically related to your child in order to be a parent, and that can be really distressing for some people in the LGBTQ plus community. But the reality is there are so many ways to build a family, and it might mean that in certain situations, there might be a couple additional legal steps that you take. As an example, in most states, the person who carries the pregnancy is a legal parent to the child. And if that's not the situation that you're in, perhaps if you're a gay couple, and so you need somebody else to contribute the uterus, you might have some additional legal navigation to make sure it's crystal clear who's going to be taking care of this kiddo. But there really are so many ways to establish this and put this together. And so you don't have to just be genetically related to them to be their parent. And being a parent is such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And there's so many ways to do it.
Oh my gosh. Well, that makes sense. Which brings us to myth number 3, something that not all people might know. So it's worth explaining and sort of builds on what you were just talking about. I think that folks need to understand the biological truth around this, and that myth is that surrogates, also known as gestational carriers, are related to the child she carries, and that basically the gestational carrier has to contribute the egg as well. Can you explain the science behind why this is not true?
Yes. So there's 2 types of surrogacy. One is traditional surrogacy, in which the surrogate actually does contribute an egg, and maybe this can be done through IUI. That's not very common and not really supported by most kind of medical guiding bodies. Classically, what happens is someone or a couple would undergo IVF or in vitro fertilization, and the egg and the sperm are put together in the IVF lab, and then that embryo is then transferred to somebody, a gestational carrier, who would then carry the pregnancy. Again, this is well regulated in the US, and different states have different rules. And so actually multiple lawyers are involved, one for the gestational carrier, one for the intended parent or parents, in order to make crystal clear again that when that baby is born, the baby belongs to the intended parent. So a gestational carrier might be carrying an embryo from somebody else. It does not mean that they are genetically related to that child.
Thank you for explaining that more. It's important for folks to understand the science behind surrogacy so we can stop the further spread of misinformation and negative stigmas about this particular fertility option. I mean, at the end of the day, surrogacy is just one of the many medical miracles we have to help people start and grow their families. And so last but not least, myth number 4 is especially important to talk about during Pride Month. And it has to do with biological family building for trans persons. So I'll turn this over to you, Dr. Adeleye.
Yes, definitely a myth has been that if you identify as trans or gender diverse, particularly if you've used gender affirming hormones or had surgery, that you can't have genetically related children if that's what you choose. And that is simply not the case. Again, I think it's so important to just focus on we need an egg, a sperm, and a uterus. And so there have been data that have emerged over the last, I would say, decade to really show that if a certain trans person who's using gender affirming hormones wants to build a family, depending on, how long they've used the hormones for, and if they've had any surgeries and what their goals are, there's a lot of different parameters. They might be able to get pregnant on their own if they're having penile vaginal intercourse. Different trans folks make different choices in terms of orientation because that's very different than gender. So it's possible that in some cases, trans folks might even be able to conceive without assistance, but if they need assistance, there's been great data emerging in the last 10 years that assisted reproductive technologies, so that's like IVF, can be really beneficial in this. Really, I think that the main limiting factor would be if somebody were to remove either their testes or ovaries or uterus, it can make it harder for them to contribute to the family building process. So it's really important if you're thinking about that to see a reproductive endocrinologist or a reproductive urologist before you do something like that. But otherwise, there are plenty of options for people that are gender diverse, and I love to counsel about that. So thank you for bringing up that really important myth.
So basically, go see your endocrinologist early and help let them guide you through that process. Yeah, I know we could probably talk all day about how this myth is just plain false. There's so many ways that the trans community is able to also biologically build the families, experience the joys, the chaos of parenthood, and there's a lot of chaos. And Dr. Tammy, I really want to thank you so much for joining me today to celebrate Pride Month and for using your scientific knowledge to debunk these myths that only spread misinformation and harm to our LGBTQ plus communities. I would love to turn it over to you for some of your closing thoughts, especially as you reach out to the audience that's watching this.
Thank you so much for raising up this important issue. I'm always happy to talk about it, and really anything related to reproductive care, reproductive access, which you've been such a champion for. And I think now more than ever is a time to really amplify the efforts that you've done, your bill that you proposed, which really the elements of that are things that you've talked about for many years. It's not new, but in the current environment, I think it's so important that we are really critically thinking about access, and in particular for the LGBTQ plus community. There not only might be, financial hurdles that like we all face, but additionally, the potential to have their rights to build families taken away. So I really do feel like we have to pay attention and we have to speak up and truly stand for what we believe in, which is that like everybody deserves the family of their dreams. If you want to be a parent, if you want to show love, we support that. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. I'm going to throw you one last quick question.
Yeah.
Even if somebody's not ready to start a family or know whether or not they want to start a family, if they're LGBTQ plus, but would you encourage them to come talk to you about options for the future so that they can think about those things going into the future and have the right information for the time when maybe later on in life they might be ready at that point?
Amazing question. Yes, really anybody, regardless of gender or orientation, if you were thinking about building a family, really good to talk at least with your primary care provider, your OBGYN, your urologist for some very preliminary conversations. But if you're seriously thinking about delaying family building, particularly if you have ovaries, or perhaps if you are part of the gender diverse community and you're going to use hormones or have a surgery that's going to affect your ovaries or your testes, then yes, absolutely. The sooner the better. Have that conversation with a reproductive endocrinologist like myself, because we can actually freeze eggs or sperm Or if you're somebody with testes and you're going to delay or maybe thinking about hormones or surgery, then talking to a reproductive urologist can be another great option to help you preserve your fertility for the future.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adeleye.
Thank you.
And I'm proud, so proud to work alongside you as we together work to protect LGBTQ rights and expand access to reproductive health care for all. Happy Pride, everyone.
Happy Pride. Thank you.